This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business. I am Peninah Karibe. We begin as always with a look at the market. The Nigerian stocks dropped to almost a two-year low on Friday as investors viewed the nomination of central bank governor for a second term as a sign that there may be no change to the monetary policy that has kept liquidity tight. The main share index fell 0.37% to 28,789 points, a level not seen since May 2017. Coming up in the show tonight. Ride-hailing company Uber enters a new era as a public listed firm. South African economists take stock on what an ANC win means to the country's turnaround plans. And China calls for dialogue to resolve trade dispute with the US. We begin in New York, where ride-hailing company Uber's IPO has begun trading at the stock exchange. The company has been valued at $82 billion ahead of its share listing in what is expected to be one of the biggest stock market flotations this year. The ride-hailing app is asking investors to pay $45 a share at the lower end of the price range expected. Uber's conservative price is an attempt to avoid the fate of rival Lyft, whose shares fell by up to a third after its recent listing. Uber is yet to make a profit and warned recently it may never do so. Since its launch in 2009, the company has lost about $9 billion. Experts say that the lower than expected valuation was Uber's attempt to deflect scrutiny of its financial performance. Uber had originally suggested a price range of between $44 to $50 for its share price listing, valuing the company at up to $120 billion. Let's get more details from Leah Duncan. She's live for us in New York. So Leah, Uber has gone public at the New York Stock Exchange and it's making its debut at a turbulent time for the markets. How was the IPO's uptake?
Well, it was certainly an unexpected turn of events for this highly anticipated IPO. It was the most anticipated since Facebook's debut back in 2012. Uber raised $8.1 billion and an $82.4 billion valuation, but shares opened below the $45 IPO price at $42. And remember, 45 was already at the lower end of the target range of $44 to $50. And the reason Uber took a more conservative approach was to try to avoid a repeat of rival Lyft's stock market struggles following its strong debut back in March. Now, if you recall, Lyft's stock soared in the first few days of trading, but quickly turned around after investors fretted over the lack of a path to profitability. And today, actually, that stock hit a record low. Now, speaking of turbulent times for the market, it certainly has been a tough week. The benchmark S&P 500 index is on track for its worst weekly loss since December. Investors, of course, worried over the possibility of a long drawn-out US-China trade dispute. And just today, President Trump said that he was in no hurry to sign a trade deal with China as higher tariffs on $200 billion in Chinese goods became effective. Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin did, however, call the talks with China today constructive, and that did lift sentiment just a bit today. But the overall downbeat mood in the market certainly appeared to also impact Uber.
So Leah, this IPO is promising to make investors richer, some of them by potentially billions of dollars. But this is a company that has never made any profits. In fact, last year alone, it made losses of more than $3 billion from operations. So why should investors be upbeat about its future?
Well, I think this is a question that we continue to hear as some of these loss-making companies go public. Analysts are really saying that investors they really want more of a tangible timeline and path to profitability for these businesses. But Uber is trying to sell itself to investors as more than just a ride-hailing or a taxi service. Uber says that it has the potential to also provide a variety of logistics services such as grocery and food delivery, organizing freight, transportation, and even financial services, much like Grab, which is its Southeast Asian counterpart. And investors actually who attended Uber's presentation to money managers, they say that the company made references to e-commerce giant Amazon and its platform and how it has developed. But Amazon, though, went public at a much lower valuation than Uber and with a lot less debt and had a lower need for cash. So at this point, it's really up to investors to decide if they believe in the Uber story as well as its potential for growth.
And then there is the issue of these tracking drivers. They're complaining about working conditions and demanding better pay. Is this likely to dampen investor sentiment? And how is Uber planning to address these issues raised by the drivers?
Yeah, well, Uber is taking some steps to address some of these concerns. It's paying more than 1 million drivers, about $300 million in total, for one-time bonuses, for instance. And it has also changed policies such as allowing riders to tip. It also planned to give its most active drivers an option to purchase shares in the IPO. Also, last year, Uber sent a letter to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission asking for a rule change so that it could then award shares to drivers while it was still a privately held company. Still, of course, we did see Uber drivers all over the world, London, New York, and other places, striking this week ahead of the stock's debut, calling for higher pay and better working conditions. But it clearly looks like these issues will continue to plague Uber for some time until they can get it all sorted out.
So a lot of excitement today, Leah, but is there a risk that Uber's share price may suffer the fate of Lyft? I mean, that's its rival after today's listing.
Right, well, that's certainly one of the concerns, but there are some things to keep in mind here. Uber did try to make a more conservative approach and take a more conservative approach overall compared to rival Lyft. In the IPO, it was oversubscribed, but it settled for a lower price, that $45 price that we talked about, compared to the expected range of $44 to $50, in order to try to, avoid a repeat of Lyft, the struggles that followed its strong debut. It also priced its offering lower in order to accommodate big mutual funds, which, unlike hedge funds, they put in offers and orders, that is, for a lower price. At one point, Uber shares fell almost 9% today, but they're off by about 3% or so today. They've come back just a bit. There's, however, still about 2 hours left in the trading session today here in the U.S., so investors will be closely watching where Uber does close out the trading session, whether perhaps it breaks through $45 or it remains below that $45 level. But of course, today is just the first day. The real test for the company will likely be in the coming days and the weeks ahead.
It will indeed, Leah. Thank you for talking to us. Leah Duncan, live for us in New York. To Nigeria and some other oil producers in Africa are set to benefit from U.S. sanctions on Venezuela and Iran as the United States aims to double the volumes of its oil input in May 2019. Reports say Nigeria, alongside other countries like Iraq, Brazil and Angola, are set to deliver their crude oil to the United States in order to ease up heavy crude oil demands in the country. Here's CGTN's Deji Badmas with what this means for Nigeria.
The news could not be coming at a better time for Nigeria, which is seeking to ramp up as much revenue as it could to fund its national budget. The United States' monthly import of Nigerian crude has been on a downward spiral, hitting a 4-year low of 539,000 barrels per day in February, and that's according to the Energy Information Administration, EIA. Analysts say the sanctions on Iran and Venezuela offer Nigeria and other oil producers on the continent the opportunity to reverse the trend.
It will be a temporary increase in revenue for Nigeria and other countries in Africa that produce oil of the type that America wants to buy. But there's nothing of a long-term nature or of any strategic value in that. So countries like Nigeria may just take the opportunity to sell a little more quantity that America is willing to buy. But Nigeria or any other country cannot plan on that.
It remains to be seen how much quantity of Nigerian crude the U.S. would be seeking to buy. Since 2010, when it bought 358.92 million barrels of Nigerian crude, it has not imported anything close to that figure, thanks in large part to massive shale production.
We should also be looking at long-term plans for our crude, either by way of export to other markets, which the Nigerian government has been doing or NIPs has been doing for quite some time, or also the refining of Nigerian crude. Because I'm one of the believers that Nigeria should not perpetually be exporting crude oil. We can do a blend. That is, we still be exporting crude oil, but we should be refining substantial proportion on our production here in Nigeria, either to meet our supply and even overcome this problem of importation of petroleum products. And we could sell to some other African countries, or even sell to other countries.
The U.S. used to be the major market for Nigeria's crude, but that is no longer the case, and it's doubtful this new demand from the U.S. would return it as the #1 market for Nigeria's sweet crude. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
An International Monetary Fund mission says that it has agreed to a 3-year lending program with the Congo Republic. The loan is subject to the government's fulfillment of reforms and approval by the IMF's executive board. Negotiations over a bailout for the oil-dependent economy have dragged on since 2017 as Congolese authorities failed to convince the IMF they were doing enough to control the national debt or tackle corruption. But Congo's reduction of its debt load and an agreement struck last month to restructure some $2 billion in debt to China led the IMF mission to back the program. The economy was hurt by a sharp drop in oil prices in 2014, causing debt levels to balloon to 118% of the GDP in 2017. A look at your corporate news now. An equity group has joined the race for the Ethiopian market. The bank CEO, James Mwangi, revealed that they had sent a request to Ethiopian authorities seeking permission to operate in the country. Equity Group is ranked as the largest bank in East Africa by customer numbers. The lender already has subsidiaries in neighboring Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, the DR Congo, and South Sudan. Platinum miner Lonmin, who just reported a drop in output, is in the process of being taken over by Sibanye-Stillwater. The firm expects full-year sales to be at the lower end of its target range. The London firm, which operates in South Africa, said total platinum production tumbled 10.3% to 276,020 ounces for the 6 months ended March 31st. Acacia Mining is hitting back at parent company Barrick Gold Corporation's allegation that the miner was an obstacle to solving a long-running tax row in Tanzania. Barrick CEO Mark Bristow said that Acacia was not cooperating, prompting Acacia to demand clarification from Barrick. But Acacia's interim CEO Peter Galeta maintains that Acacia is totally committed to achieving a negotiated solution and laid out what he said was a series of facts. And Hamleys, the world's oldest toy retailer, is set to pass from Chinese to Indian control after Reliance Industries said it had agreed to buy the British high street icon. Through its Reliance brand subsidiary, the conglomerate said it signed an agreement to buy the 250-year-old chain from Hong Kong-listed Seaburner International Holdings Limited. And that's a look at your corporate headlines. This is Global Business, still ahead. South African economists take stock on what an ANC win means to the country's turnaround plans. And Zambia delays the payment of loans totaling $2.6 billion.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global Business Reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
Economic data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Peninah Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
Reporting from Nairobi's city center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
South Africans went to the polls this week in the 6th national election and arguably the most important since the end of apartheid. As the country's Independent Electoral Commission finalizes the results, economists and analysts are looking ahead to what the outcome will mean for the South African economy. CGTN's Angela Coppola explains.
Economists monitoring South Africa's socio-economic environment don't expect to see too much change in the short term.
There are some changes in the political, in politics in South Africa, not that much, which is probably the best case scenario that the financial markets would have wanted. So we've got more or less what we've wanted. There could be some changes still, but what is clear, it still will be the ANC and it still will be Cyril Ramaphosa.
While the ANC was returned to power with a lower percentage majority, it's not all bad news.
I think it is a more clear-cut mandate that Ramaphosa got out of it, and at least the ANC can go back and say our campaign was centred on cleaning up the ANC, promising good and responsible government.
Markets will be watching what the new president will do about a new cabinet.
Will it be a mixed cabinet in the sense of the good guys and the bad guys, or will it be a Cyril cabinet? And then, of course, after that, who's going to be the Minister of Finance and what kind of policies can we be looking forward to? And I'm afraid those policies are probably going to include a lot of very, very bad medicine. And the sooner the president does this, and the sooner he takes those very unpopular decisions, the better for him and the better for the South African economy.
Analysts say that Ramaphosa was hamstrung by internal politics during his first short term in office.
I think it should be able, the ANC under Cyril Ramaphosa, under this type of mandate, be able to move ahead more clearly than it had been in the past.
Now that the elections are out of the way, it's time to get down to the brass tacks of actually building the economy and getting those people who are unemployed employed. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Tshwane, South Africa.
Zambia has delayed the receipt of loans totaling $2.6 billion contracted last year in order to rein in its soaring debt. The country's finance minister says Zambia's external debt at the end of the first quarter of this year had increased to $10.17 billion at the end of 2018. The debt pile had pierced the $10 billion level after jumping from $8.74 billion at the end of 2017. The finance ministry says the loans approved last year covered infrastructure, energy, agriculture, health, education and defense. Zambia's 2018 fiscal deficit stood at 7.5% of the gross domestic product, higher than an earlier government projection of around 7%. Foreign reserves dropped to $1.43 billion at the end of February this year from $1.56 billion at the end of 2018. Home Homegrown technology has been described as an invaluable resource in efforts to promote agriculture development in Nigeria. Its local agricultural equipment manufacturers are reducing machinery costs by custom building equipment. They hope their machinery will transform the country's agriculture value chain. CGTN Samson Omale reports.
Nigeria is import dependent on agricultural equipment and technology. But in Jos, the Plateau State capital, 24-year-old Jerry Malo is trying to change all of that. He is producing high-quality, functional and more affordable agro-industrial equipment for farmers.
I create interactive sessions with farmers where they tell me their problems, they tell me the challenges they are faced with. We come up with designs of machines and we manufacture these machines to their specifications.
In another part of Jos, Solomon, a machine engineer, has been designing locally made agricultural machines for over 15 years and prides himself on being able to tailor-made products to fit the customer's needs.
People come, they want to start small industry, processing one thing or the other, grinding certain things to high degree of fineness. So we use engineering principles to create those things.
These manufacturers believe investment in the agriculture sectors will create job opportunities for many Nigerians in the future and boost the country's GDP. But there are a number of challenges, from irregular cash flow to intermittent electricity.
Some months we are able to sell up to 100 machines, different machines, while sometimes we go even 2 months without selling a machine.
Some experts believe favorable government policies on Nigeria's steel industry will be critical to the survival of these locally made machines.
So it's a decision by government to ask itself, do we have what it takes to produce our steel in this country? And I believe we have.
Custom-made products and lower costs are just some of the benefits of locally manufactured farm equipment. But despite the savings, some of these machines are still out of the reach of many poorer farmers in Nigeria.
80% of Nigeria's food is produced by small-scale and subsistence farmers, but locally sourced equipment can increase the rate of production.
Like this 1 hectare, if you put maybe 10 people, they may not finish it in 1 day. But tractor can finish it within 1.5 hours. You can finish it. Using mechanized farming is more preferable, especially the tractors.
With the rise in locally made machines, it's hoped that food insecurity in Nigeria could become a thing of the past. Samson Omale, CGTN, Jos, Nigeria.
Tunisia has recorded an 18% increase in the number of tourist arrivals during the first 4 months of this year compared to the same period last year. According to the country's Ministry of Tourism, the number of foreign tourists in this period was over 2 million, with revenues reaching about $330 million. CGTN's Adnet Shawashi has more.
The Ministry of Tourism and Handicrafts is aiming to attract 9 million tourists this season. Analysts say the progress indicators recorded each month range from 25 to 30% for all markets, especially for the Russian and Chinese markets.
This Russian market has continued to grow and could exceed the target of 750,000 tourists. The Chinese market has tripled this year, and the Ministry of Tourism announced a plan to attract 100,000 Chinese visitors.
Regarding the pilgrimage to Al-Ghariba, Jerba, authorities stress that all preparations are underway in terms of the organization and security of this event that will take place on May 22nd and 23rd.
It's the annual gathering of Jews from the whole world in Tunisia. It's a great religious and tourism event. The success of this international Jewish pilgrimage guarantees the success of the whole tourist season.
The Secretary General of the World Tourism Organization, UNWTO, expressed his full support to the Tunisian authorities in achieving their objective of increasing the number of tourists in 2019.
We are very glad to see that the numbers are increasing, and Tunisia is one of the best
example and one of the fastest growing country on the continent.
The Maghreb markets, which represent 44% of tourist arrivals to date, have seen an increasing pace since Tunisia received, during the first quarter of 2019, about 496,000 Algerian tourists and 473,000 Libyans. Many countries lifted travel restrictions on Tunisia or regions of Tunisia. The latest was Spain this week and Japan in March 2019. Authorities in these countries had banned trips to the Tunisian destination following a wave of terrorist attacks in 2015 on the Bardo Museum and a beach resort in the coastal city of Sousse. Adin Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
The Tanzania Meteorological Agency is warning of extreme weather conditions for people living in the east and southern parts of the country. Seasonal rains, known as the Masika rains, are expected to hit the East African nation just weeks after Cyclone Kenneth left trails of destruction. With the details, here's CGTN's Daniel Kijo.
Tanzania's seasonal rains, known as Masika rains, are hitting the country with a vengeance. Delayed due to Cyclone Kenneth affecting the rainfall patterns in the area, this seasonal downfall is heavier than usual. Asha Mwajuma is a food vendor in Msasani Market. She says poor water management systems mean she's losing business.
Before the rains, I used to cook 10 kilos, and now with the rains, I only cook 3 kilos, and even those don't get finished. So that means I'm losing money.
Tanzania's meteorological agency believes the rains may cause severe flooding. It's expected the period of stronger rainfall than usual will last for 4 days.
The rainfall system were disturbed by those tropical cyclones, but now the tropical cyclones are no longer there. So the system has come on its own normal situation. That's why now we're having those rains.
The government has asked people living in areas that are prone to floods to leave before disaster strikes. It's also warning citizens not to rely on old infrastructure such as bridges and roads, saying the infrastructures might collapse due to the heavy rainfall and cause casualties. Weather experts say that even after the next few days of heavy downfall, seasonal rains are expected to continue further for another 2 or 3 weeks. So many Tanzanians are worried about how the country's infrastructure will cope. They fear flooding as well as destruction of their property. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
You're watching Global Business. Let's take a quick break. Straight ahead. China calls for dialogue to resolve trade dispute with the US. And curtains are set to open at iPhone maker's most ambitious retail store in the US capital.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what do you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Let's have a look at the top stories of the day. South Africa's governing African National Congress is set to win the 2019 national general elections by a huge margin. While the country is still awaiting the final results, the ANC has come out as an outright winner in the majority of provinces, while the main opposition party, the Democratic Alliance, has lost some ground. 4 foreign hostages have been freed by French forces in Burkina Faso, but they were being held captive by a militant group. The French government says 2 of those released are French. The other 2 are said to be an American woman and a South Korean woman. The French hostages had been kidnapped in neighboring Benin on the 1st of May. They were on safari in Penjari National Park. And the 2019 Global Report on internal displacement have revealed that a record 41 million people were forced out of their dwellings by conflict and disasters in 2018. The countries most affected include Syria and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Ethiopia also tops the list with nearly 3 million displacements. China, India and the Philippines are some of the countries most affected by natural disasters like cyclones and floods, which saw many of their citizens displaced. And that's a look at our top stories. Let's head to Washington, where China and the United States are involved in another round of talks to find a resolution to their current trade impasse. However, negotiators are facing an uphill battle after a U.S. move to increase tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods came into force in the last few hours. The Chinese Foreign Ministry today stressed the importance of the dialogue, saying the issue was a global concern and the two sides had to find a way forward. China's Commerce Ministry, on the other hand, said it was disappointed by Washington's decision to increase tariffs, adding that it would respond with countermeasures of its own.
It's in the interests of both the U.S. and China that there's a healthy and stable relationship. And the international communities hope so too. We hope this is something the U.S. can work with China to achieve.
Staying with the U.S.-China tradeway, the U.S. hiking tariffs is just the latest development in what China calls the largest trade war in economic history. CGTN's Gerald Tan has this overview of what's at stake.
The United States and China are each other's largest trading partners, but China exports a lot more to the U.S. than the other way around. Let's take a look. Last year, the United States exported goods worth over $120 billion to China, but it imported more than $539 billion of Chinese merchandise. Now, China's Ministry of Commerce says conflicting accounting methods distort the deficit. It says US calculations inflate it by around 20% every year. And for the US, that translates into a $419 billion trade deficit in goods. And that's a problem for Donald Trump. Here he is in 2016.
In fact, it's amazing that for years we've had massive deficits and going up fast. Unless I become president, you will see a drop like you've never seen before. You will never see before.
So despite Trump's campaign pledge, he's now presiding over the widest US trade deficit on record. To make the price of domestic goods more competitive, Trump slapped tariffs on Chinese merchandise worth more than $250 billion. Beijing retaliated, imposing tariffs on US imports amounting to $110 billion. Then this week, Trump said he would hike tariffs from 10% to 25% on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods starting Friday. That's not all. He's also threatening new tariffs on additional Chinese imports worth $325 billion. Essentially, this would cover everything shipped in from China. Trump says he's taking action because of a lack of progress in the trade negotiations. China's Ministry of Commerce says any escalation in trade friction is not in anyone's interests and warns China will take necessary countermeasures. Gerald Tan, CGTN, Washington.
Still in China, the country aims to maintain a stable industrial growth this year by cultivating a robust domestic market. One of the ways it plans to achieve this is by accelerating its industrial upgrade. CGTN's Michelle Vandenberg has the story.
E2 Tech, an AI startup company located in Shanghai, is planning to unveil the very first deep learning cloud chip in the world. The chip is also setting another milestone for China. That's because it's the first chip made in China from design to production.
Our chip is a combination of the most cutting-edge AI algorithm and design method. It will be a key driver and offer more possibilities for future AI products.
Data from consulting firm McKinsey shows that China accounts for over 20% of the world's manufacturing activity, more than any other country on Earth. However, its manufacturing productivity remains far behind, only a fifth of that of developed economies. Therefore, China's policymakers are working hard to upgrade the country's digital manufacturing capabilities by embracing such high tech as AI and big data.
Big data and infotech are like brains for our logistics business. It not only can boost the restructuring of the sector, it also helped our company save a lot of costs, more than 20 million yuan.
China's emerging industries are characterized by a high integration of digital innovation. Government data shows that these industries have seen rapid expansion in the first quarter of this year, up 6.7% from a year ago. That's 0.2 percentage points higher than traditional manufacturing sector. Medicare equipment, tech communications, and aviation are the top three areas that recorded the highest growth. Analysts say that China is also expected to step up efforts to boost info product consumption and nurture such high-tech industries as service robots and wearables as it opens its doors wider to overseas competitors. Michelle Vandenberg, CGTN.
Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos has announced plans to send a spaceship and people to the moon by 2024. According to Bezos, his space company Blue Origin will land a robotic ship the size of a small house. The reusable Blue Moon vehicle is designed to carry rovers and other large payloads to the lunar surface. It's said to be followed by a version that could bring people to the moon along the same time frame as NASA's return. The vehicle has been in development for the last 3 years and is on track for a 2024 crewed landing. According to Bezos, the lander is only the beginning of a larger project to create greater infrastructure in space.
Now that we have mapped the entire moon in great detail, we can use those pre-existing maps to tell the system, it's a machine learning system, to tell the system what it should be looking for in terms of craters and other features, and it navigates relative to that. What O'Neill and his students came up with was the idea of manufactured worlds, rotated to create artificial gravity with centrifugal force. These are very large structures, miles on end, and they hold 1 million people or more.
Leaders of 27 EU member states have stressed the continued solidarity of the European Union at a summit in Romania as the bloc faces a range of challenges threatening to divide it. The event comes just 2 weeks before European parliamentary elections that have been overshadowed by concerns over Britain's further efforts to leave the bloc. CGTN's Mariam Zaidi has the details.
A beautiful day for a celebration. Flags aloft, locals line the streets of the small, picturesque Romanian town, Sibiu. It was chosen by Klaus Ioannis, the town's former mayor and Romania's current president, to host EU leaders for an informal summit on the day that the bloc annually celebrates its unity, Europe Day.
It's a good future. It's a good future, and this is why we come together today in Sibiu. We are talking about the future of the Union. We are united, we know what to do, we know when to do, and we know how to do.
But as this wasn't a formal summit, leaders delivered more platitudes than serious proposals, with declarations to stay united through thick and thin and to safeguard the future. Although climate change did make the footnotes of their hopes for a better future. But one concrete plan was announced.
On the 28th of May, I will call a meeting of all 28 EU leaders in order to start the nomination process. My intention is to carry out the election of heads of EU institutions in a swift, smooth and effective manner.
The next few months will bring much renewal across EU institutions. New presidents for the EU Commission and Council will be chosen. But before that, on May 23rd, possibly the most important elections in a generation will take place. Voters will go to the polls to elect 700 plus MEPs across the bloc.
More than 400 million European citizens will have to choose with a very clear alternative. Do we want to build together, even differently, by improving things? Or do we want to deconstruct Europe and return to nationalism?
CBU did, though, break from the traditional stuffiness of EU summits. While outside posing for photos, leaders even joined in with the crowds. All of this togetherness almost made you forget that today was meant to be the dawn of a new beginning, the unveiling of the bloc's post-Brexit renewal. With divorce still on the cards, the UK was politely asked not to attend.
Huh? Hi. I'm missing her. You're missing her?
We've seen some really great scenes here in CBU, and it's not just because of the idyllic surroundings. The EU, of course, has its problems, but they wanted this informal gathering to be a celebration. And why not? Perhaps if nothing else, it served as a much-needed respite from the Brexit chaos. So happy Europe Day. Mariam Zaidi, CGTN, CBU.
In Singapore, hawker centres are a huge affair. Its open spaces are bustling with promises that are even attracting chefs from Michelin-starred restaurants. Singapore's government is now proposing to get them on UNESCO's list of intangible heritage. CGTN's Mira Liu has this story.
Burnt Ends is a Michelin-starred barbecue restaurant in Singapore, and David Pind is the chef. He came to Singapore 6 years ago and was taken in by the allure and charm of the hawker scene in the country. Since then, he wanted to have a store of his own. But like any good barbecue, the ingredients and timing has to be just right. This month, the 34-year-old Australian finally opened Meatsmith's Western Barbecue at the famous Makan Sutra Gluttons Bay Hawker Centre.
It's the heart and soul of Singapore, right? You've got this absolute melting pot of all these different cultures from all around Southeast Asia and the rest of the world that have all sort of combined to come in here and form these amazing, innovative new dishes, and also a lot of historic dishes from their own cultures. And to be a part of that is something that is pretty incredible.
The hawker culture in Singapore is no stranger to stardom. In 2017, a chicken rice stall in the city-state became the first hawker to be awarded a Michelin star. The Hakka culture also found international stage last year on the Hollywood film Crazy Rich Asians. Street hawker has been a common sight in Singapore for over 200 years, plying the streets with their push carts, providing the people with quick and affordable meals. Street hawking was a popular occupation for the first wave of immigrants. Around the 1960s, authorities decided to gather roving street hawkers into hubs with proper sanitation and amenities. The first hawker centers were born. Hawker food became an essential part of the country's culture. At the beginning, it represented a melting pot of the 4 races in Singapore, with stalls selling Malay, Chinese, Indian, and Eurasian food. But like Singapore, the hawker culture has evolved into a more international spread. It is common now to find food from other countries like Vietnam, Thailand, China, or Japan, the new wave of immigrants. Even hipster stalls that sell craft beer are frothing with customers. Opened in 2015, Third Culture Brewing is one of the few craft beer hawker stalls in Singapore. The Singaporean owners say that hawker scene is starting to welcome new flavors.
There's been a lot of change in the last few years. For a while, it's been a struggle to get young people to come and open up businesses in hawker centers. I think it's becoming more attractive now. Also, the crowd has changed a lot. When I was young, it was mostly like uncles and aunties, I guess mostly locals. I mean, now you see a lot of expats, you see a lot of tourists, obviously, because Singapore is known for its food.
It's obvious that more things are brewing in the Lion City's hawker scene, and it's not surprising why. The hawker culture, which is a unique blend of the country's immigration policy and the people's love for food, is baked into the nation's identity. All these factors will play a key role to the Republic's UNESCO bid in the coming month. Miro Lu, CGTN, Singapore.
Apple just previewed its newest location at the Carnegie Library on Mount Vernon Square. This is Apple's most extensive historic restoration project to date, restoring and revitalizing the Beaux-Arts-style building once home to Washington, D.C.'s Central Public Library. To celebrate the opening, 40 artists will lead sessions during a 6-week Storymaker Festival. At the store, customers can explore Apple's latest products and work with over 225 highly trained staff members offering advice and technical support, as well as assistance for small businesses. Alexandria Majala has more.
Half store, half museum, Apple's new location in the U.S. Capitol within a historic landmark is being described as the most ambitious project for its retail operations. Apple has set up at the renovated Carnegie Library in downtown Washington, just blocks from the White House and the Capitol building. The project, launched in 2015, entailed meticulous restoration of the marble facade 1903 building, originally designed as a public library and paid for by industrialist Andrew Carnegie, who died in 1919.
It is almost one of the greatest challenges to be part of a building's journey for, let's say, for a few years. These buildings might last hundreds of years, so as you are involved with a building, you have to do something which is very respectful with the old building, but on the other hand, give the building, help the building to go through the next phase of its life.
Apple will open its doors on May 11th. One of the facility's 3 floors will be used for its retail store and education programs, while the other 2 are dedicated to local historical exhibits. The renovation reportedly cost $30 million.
What we were really thoughtful in is paying homage to the fact that this was a library, it was a place of learning, and so what we've done in building the programming is tried to reimagine the location as a new place to learn something.
The project was the most ambitious for the iPhone maker because of the size of the building, some 6,000 square meters, and its historical significance. Apple worked with conservation experts to preserve the historic facade, adding new elements of the original Vermont marble and restoring 20th century design elements in the interior space. Apple sought to avoid commercial promotion with the only elements 2 modest-sized and removable corporate logos on the facade. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Let's look at the commodities market, and oil prices rose today, even as the start of U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff hike on $200 billion of Chinese goods kept tensions high in the trade dispute between the world's two biggest economies. Brent crude oil was up 67 cents at $71.06 a barrel by 11:45 a.m. GMT, having touched a peak of $71.23. Gold too edged higher and was en route for a weekly gain. Still ahead on Global Business. A young Tanzanian engineer develops the country's first electronic car.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Tanzania is preparing to open its first vehicle assembly plant in Dar es Salaam later in the year, marking a major step in the nation's auto industry ambitions. However, Gabriel Jeremiah has his own vision for the country's motor future. The young Tanzanian inventor and engineering graduate has built his own environmentally friendly electric car, the first of its kind to be manufactured in the country. Its rechargeable battery only requires a small amount of electricity. CGTN's Daniel Kijo has more.
This vehicle is unlike most in Tanzania, not only in appearance, but also in the way it runs. Gabriel, a recent graduate, has built an electric car that he hopes will drive a change in his country's automobile industry.
It can help reduce costs very significantly because it can be used to go short distances using normal home electricity. With $1 or less, someone can use it for up to 3 days.
The car took Gabriel 3 months to assemble and runs on a motor powered by an electric battery. He eventually hopes to design a self-reliant, rechargeable model that can function in remote areas where there isn't access to electricity. Gabriel's project has had its challenges. He says equipment and parts were hard to find, forcing him and his team to improvise. However, Gabriel does have the support of his former college and professors who are fully behind his commercial aspirations for the vehicle.
The interested technology brokers will come to us and then we'll discuss, look at the intellectual property rights, the agreements, so that it could be put into commercial scale.
Tanzania has recently reaffirmed its commitment to new environmental policies, such as the introduction of a ban on single-use plastic bags. Gabriel's e-car offers a clean alternative to the toxic emissions from the country's increasing number of gas-guzzling vehicles. Gabriel says his invention produces no harmful emissions, and it costs about $1 for each charge, providing the car with a range of 90 kilometers. However, at the moment, the conventional car remains king. A Tanzanian company recently signed a $10 million deal to build the country's first car assembly plant. The firm's initial aim is to produce 1,000 cars per year.
My big expectations are to eventually have a big factory that makes Tanzanian cars of a certain type.
Tanzania's automobile industry has a long journey ahead of it, but with innovators like Gabriel, the sector is heading in the right direction. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
Unwanted or non-working electronic devices have become known as electronic waste or e-waste. In Ghana, much of this waste is broken up by scrap metal dealers who recover the metal from it. However, it's estimated that about 80,000 people living around the country's biggest e-waste dump are at risk of food contamination. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai tells us more.
Adiza Mutala sells porridge and local delicacies to residents of Abubloshi, a slum in Accra which is the biggest electronic waste dump in Ghana. She is one of many residents here affected by pollution from the rubbish.
The activities of the scrap dealers really affect our health, but we have no other alternative than to continue selling food here. This is my only source of income.
Research by environmental groups IPEN and the Bezos Action Network has found that some of the most hazardous chemicals on earth are entering the food chain through the disposal of e-waste in Abubloshi. It says an analysis of eggs laid by the free-range chickens in the area showed toxins that could pose serious health risks to residents who eat them. Scrap metal dealers here agree the activities pollute the environment, but with over 5,000 people employed in the industry, activity cannot be completely stopped.
We need waste collectors to put it.
We need waste collectors to put the waste in. If we have some of the waste tanks here, anytime we get the waste, we will put it inside. That will help us keep this scrapyard clean.
And then we are scrapyard.
Environmental groups also believe the food market near Abubloshi could be contaminated with toxic substances as a result of the smoke and dust from the dump.
Researchers advise treating Abubloshi as a heavily contaminated site that requires cleanup. However, the government says it is not currently considering closing the e-waste dump.
Training workshops have been set up, providing advice on how to collect, dismantling and disposal of e-waste. And the government is also attempting to resolve the problem. It says it is working on building an integrated e-waste recycling facility at Abubloshi to help control the pollution and protect the health of residents and food vendors like Adiza Mutala. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
An eco-friendly South African shoe care brand has created a sizable footprint in the global market. Sneaker Lab has developed a unique range of water-based products to keep sport and other shoes in tip-top condition. Trendy sneakers have become a hit, especially among young people. The global footwear industry commands over $50 billion a year. CGTN's Julie Shire has more.
A status symbol, a valuable collector's item, or just a comfortable pair of running shoes. Sneakers have become an important accessory in the millennial wardrobe, but keeping them looking good can be a drag. An opportunity spotted by Sneaker Lab founder Joe Farah.
I wanted to start a business that would create jobs in South Africa. I had a passion for sneakers and streetwear, and the idea behind it was to create a brand that I could take globally.
Farah was intent on creating products that were compatible with nature and would preserve the look and feel of a good pair of sneakers.
Using chemicals and soaps and those kinds of things to clean and protect sneakers is just not the way to go. If we're going to be sustainable and we're going to, take care of our planet, we've got to think way into the future.
Taking care of your sneakers is like taking insurance for your sneakers. So when you take good care of your sneakers, they're going to last longer, and lasting longer means saving more money.
The company now exports the homegrown product to over 50 countries in Asia, Africa, Europe, and the US.
The first territory that we got into outside of that was Scandinavia, because they're very green conscious, and because we're the only green certified sneaker care brand in the world, the Scandinavians like jumped on it.
So let's see what the fuss is about.
Seppo, thank you so much. Excellent. The wonderful thing about these products is that it took less than 5 minutes to get my shoes looking brand new, and they don't hurt the environment. Julie Shire, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Let's wrap up with a look at the currencies. The Naira firmed today after the central bank governor Godwin Emefiele was nominated for a second term at the helm of the bank, and of course that nomination is subject to confirmation by the upper house of parliament. Here in East Africa, the Ugandan shilling was stable amid limited market activity at the week's close. And with that, we come to the end of Global Business tonight. We welcome your feedback. Send it to the contacts on the screen and follow us on our digital media platform. I'm Peninah Karibe. Thank you for your company.